Hey there everyone, I am Corsi and welcome to The Fluffy Atheist. Today we're going to be...
Hold that thought.
Demon, I'm trying to do the cold open.
Stop getting hysterical, fatty!
I'm not fat, I'm fluffy. It's The Fluffy Atheist. Kind of in the name.
That's understandable.
Well, now the cold open's fucking ruined. Anyway, so I heard you and Angel have a good video for me to do.
This is amazing!
Well, get on with it.
Unless you're raised in a Baptist Sunday school, you probably think that if you believe in God, you should be able to explain why. Luckily, Christians and other philosophers have been answering this question for over 2,000 years.
Was that 10 arguments for God?
Yes!
Okay, then we'll do this differently today. So we're back to Redeemed Zoomer. He's a guy that uses basic clips and bad arguments, but this should be fun. Anyway, we're going to run this as fast as we can since we're looking at 10 arguments for God, one of which is going to be really fun that I haven't even touched on yet over, like, what, an entire year of the channel being active? So let's do this with a timer, shall we? You can do this. Okay. Angel, start the clock on his first argument, please. Okay, then.
This is going to be very entertaining.
Ready, set, go.
Evidentialism tries to argue for God by giving evidence of supernatural events. For example, a lot of Christians think the resurrection of Christ can be historically proven because there were a lot of eyewitnesses who all died for their faith, and generally people don't die for something they know isn't true. Sometimes people give evidence of supernatural things like demonic possessions, where people start speaking in languages they don't know, or near-death experiences where people see things outside their body that they shouldn't have been able to see.
Things the Bible claims are not evidence that the things the Bible claims are true. I can say I have 10,000 eyewitnesses that saw a unicorn with me, but that doesn't demonstrate unicorns are real. As for giving up their lives, I mean, by that fallacious logic, the Heaven's Gate cult was right. Demonic possessions are psychological sicknesses, and people need therapy, not an exorcist. Near-death experiences have been demonstrated to be false, and xenoglossy has never been demonstrated to be true. On every case we studied, it's been demonstrated to be false, where the person learned the language in the past, stopped speaking it for a long time. And that's called cryptomnesia. Next.
The moral argument is basically, objective morality is only real if God is real, but objective morality is real, so therefore God is real. Question, is cannibalism good or bad? I think it's good. I think it's bad. I think it's good. I think it's bad. Which one of them is correct? Now, I'm assuming you agree with this one. If you don't, please stay away from me. But how do you know that he's actually correct? How do you know that these aren't just different opinions? Our little friend here can only be objectively correct if there's a supreme authority that says cannibalism is bad. And that supreme authority is what we would call God.
I think he just debunked himself. I personally find cannibalism never to be the option, but there are going to be people that think it is, and I am sure they have arguments for it. But just because you think a Sky Daddy said something is bad doesn't mean it factually is one way or the other. Secondly, the biblical God has changed his morality in the Bible, so morality can't be objective in the case in any sense. Next.
The cosmological argument is basically that something must have caused everything else. Everything that happens has a cause, and that has a cause, and that has a cause. So where does this go? Does this go on forever? That's not possible. At some point, there needs to be a first cause of everything else. There needs to be an unmoved mover, an uncaused causer, an unchanged changer. It needs to be eternal, because if it ever starts or stops existing, that's change, and it can't do that. It needs to be outside the universe, because everything in the universe is caused. It also needs to be all-powerful, because if it can't be moved, but it can move anything else, that means it's all-powerful. And this is what we would call God.
This is perhaps the worst serious argument for God. Let me explain. They are talking about first cause, but in naturalism, the first cause for the universe, as far as we know it, was the initial expansion. But before the singularity expanded, quantum physics is uncaused and can cause change, and can make things happen. Hawking radiation is based in quantum physics, so the point is that a theist is arguing for naturalism, but with an extra step. They need to justify the extra step as they've already agreed to everything spoken by naturalism. Thank you for that, by the way. Shit, I'm on a timer. Shit! Next!
Pascal's wager is much simpler, and it's more of a thought experiment than an argument. Let's say you're an atheist, and atheism turns out to be correct. Nothing happens after you die. Well then, you don't really gain or lose anything, it's just kinda neutral for you. But let's say you're an atheist, and it turns out you're wrong, and God is real, then it could be very bad for you. Now let's say you believe in God, and it turns out atheism is correct, well then you still don't gain or lose anything, it's just neutral. But if you believe in God and God is real, then you could gain everything. So between these two possibilities, which one do you want to bet on? This one gives you a much better chance, so it's better for you to believe in God.
I stand corrected. This is the worst argument for God. To take this out is child's play. God is supposed to know everything, so he would know if I am lying or not. If you expect me to fake it till I make it by saying I believe when I don't actually believe, don't you think an all-knowing, all-powerful, all-seeing God would know I don't actually believe and I'd go to hell anyway?
Of course.
Exactly. Next.
The teleological argument says that stuff in the universe seems to have a purpose, so that means the universe must have had a designer. If you found a machine lying around, you would assume that somebody designed the machine. So the teleological argument tries to argue that the universe works like a machine, so somebody must have designed the universe. Things in nature, like the human cell or the ecosystem of the world, are very complex and they work like a machine. Now, Darwinian evolution can explain why that is, but there's also things Darwinian evolution can't explain, like the 4 constants of the universe. There are physical constants like the gravitational constant and the electron charge, the strong nuclear force and the weak nuclear force that are perfectly fine-tuned, such that if they were even the slightest bit different, the entire universe would immediately collapse in on itself.
The cosmological constants aren't done on the back of your 5th grade notebook after you've sniffed Elmer's glue for 6 hours straight. They're done on reams of paper by people far smarter than me and especially you, and show the universe isn't fine-tuned.
Keep going.
Besides, if it were fine-tuned for life, why is everything else in the universe trying to kill us on a near-constant basis? We live around a sun that is trying to kill us with radiation. We can't go out into space without bringing part of the Earth with us so we can actually live out there. As for the human cell and its ecosystem, you're wrong and right. Darwinian evolution doesn't say why the cell was formed that way or how it works. Different parts of genetics tell us that. But Darwinian evolution does help us know what is happening in Earth's ecosystem. Suck it up, Buttercup. If you think this is God's design, he is a shitty painter. Our eyes see upside down and our brains have to fix it. The laryngeal nerve in mammals like us has to take a long-distance trip halfway around our body just to get back where it was. Our feet smell and our nose runs, so please do your research instead of just trying to convince the uneducated. Next.
The ontological argument says God exists because of the way he is. Bruh. No, seriously. God is defined as that than which nothing greater can be conceived. That means God must be all-powerful, because being all-powerful is greater than having limited power. God must be all-knowing, because being all-knowing is greater than having limited knowledge. God must be all-good, because being all-good is greater than being flawed. And God must exist, because existing is greater than not existing. Wait, just because we can think of a greatest possible being doesn't mean it actually exists. Well, actually it does, because existing in reality is greater than just existing in the mind. Okay, but I could use that to argue for the existence of the greatest possible pizza. Well, actually, no, you can't, because the definition of pizza implies limitations like a limited size and able to be broken. If you had a pizza that was indestructible, eternal, all-powerful, and infinitely large, it wouldn't be a pizza anymore, it would just be God. Basically, if your pizza gets infinitely great, it'll turn into God.
This is the argument that says the land of make-believe must actually exist because we thought of something so great that we thought it into existence. The problem here is I can always think of a being with all the powers that God had, but created God and then call that new God God. Then repeat the process indefinitely. There can always be something imagined that is greater than the last one by giving it the power to create the previous thing. So you can never think of a greatest powerful being. So a greatest powerful being can't exist. Next.
There is also the argument from personal experience. It may sound silly, but everyone does see the world through the lens of their own personal experience. A lot of people are convinced God exists either because of supernatural events they've seen, or because of answered prayers, or just coincidences in their life. So this is very good at convincing oneself that God exists, but not very good at convincing other people.
Holy fuck, man. Just because you feel a way about something doesn't mean God is real. I could tell you I saw a golden unicorn running on a rainbow bridge with glitter streaming out of his silvery mane, but no one would ever believe me, and I wouldn't expect you to either. I'm sure you had some personal experience, but unless I have one too, it's dishonest to call it an argument for God. Next.
The transcendental argument basically says without God, nothing can make sense at all. There's a lot of things we assume, but we can't prove. We assume that logic works. We assume that there's consistency in the natural world. We assume that truth exists, but we can't prove any of these things scientifically, because these are the basic assumptions we need to make to even do science. All of these things make sense if we presuppose a worldview where God exists, because then we can say all these other things are grounded in the mind of God. But if God doesn't exist, then we have no justification for the things we assume, and everything just collapses.
We don't assume how logic works. It literally describes itself. It's simply a brute fact. The laws of logic have identity. That's the law of identity. They can't both exist and not exist. That's the law of non-contradiction. And they either have to exist or not exist. That's the law of excluded middle, so they can be demonstrated to be the case. The consistency of nature is more of an issue for the Christian worldview, since biblically God changes the laws of nature to suit his fancy at the time, and like stopping the Earth's rotation so the sun would shine for 24 hours straight, changing the laws of gravity so water would spring up out of the ground and flood the earth. God snapped the universe into existence, so how could there ever be a consistency in nature in a chaotic Christian standpoint? It's mind-boggling. Well, from a naturalistic worldview, we can observe how nature has been consistent and have no reason to expect that to change. And yes, truth exists. As long as you can prove one thing true to yourself, you can show truth does exist. To do that, you just have to say that you exist, because you couldn't have said that idea if you didn't exist. There, something is true, and I didn't need God to figure that out. Do I know all the answers to reality? Of course not, but then ask a theist if they know every detail of God's nature, and they will say also no. But they're the ones trying to bounce around like a goofball as if they know for a fact that God exists, so they have all the answers and foundations when they have no idea what's really going on, even from their own stance. Next.
There is the argument from the mind, or consciousness, which says consciousness cannot be explained naturally. Generally, the atheist explanation of consciousness is that our brain is just a very advanced biological machine, but unlike our minds, machines can be reduced to their parts. Now, our brain can be reduced to its brain cells, but that's not the same as the experience of consciousness. For example, you could find a part of our brain that sees the color yellow, but that's not the same as the experience of seeing yellowness. You cannot study consciousness scientifically, because one can only observe one's own consciousness. For example, there is no way to know if we all see the same colors. Who knows, maybe yellow looks like this to me. For all you know, you could be the only person who exists. A single atom is not conscious. Two atoms are not conscious. A bunch of atoms are not conscious. So even if you have a complex system, it's still just a complex arrangement of atoms which are not conscious. So where does consciousness come from? So this isn't exactly an argument for God, but it is an argument for the human soul, because it shows you need something immaterial to explain consciousness.
Well, at least he was honest at the end. But yes, it's not just the atoms in our brain that give us consciousness. We don't understand how a brain works entirely, and that's fine. We're working on it. And by we, I mean humanity as a whole. Time. Anyway, the definition of consciousness is talking about experiences we can have, which we did earlier, but I'll expand on it a bit. Even lower life forms have experiences in consciousness. Take my dog, for instance. She likes the cold more than she likes summer heat. When she goes out and experiences cold, she refuses to come in. Yes, she's a husky. She likes experience the fact that it's cold outside. She appears to be self-aware. She knows her name. She knows how to beg for food properly. I taught her all these things. None of this is shocking to anyone. So does she have a soul too? I mean, there's no way to prove that we do or don't have one. And the one time someone tried to prove it, they failed in that attempt when their data was peer-reviewed. So I don't feel this has met the burden of proof at all. Next.
Then there's the argument from mathematics, which says there's an infinite reality higher than our physical universe. So basic math isn't all that special. For example, the number 5 corresponds to 5 apples, and 5 times 3 corresponds to 3 groups of 5 apples. But the more you get into advanced math, the more math starts to get disconnected from our world, but it still works. For example, there's real numbers, which are numbers that correspond to real things, but there's also imaginary numbers that are just as mathematically real, but they don't correspond to the real world, which is why they're not called real numbers. But they still exist mathematically, even though they don't exist in the real world. Let's look at the 5 most important numbers in mathematics. 1 is obviously important because it's the basis for all real numbers. 0 is very important because it's necessary for doing algebra. I is very important because it's the basis for all imaginary numbers. E is very important for doing exponential functions, and pi is necessary for doing math with circles. Now, all these numbers are seemingly unrelated to each other, but they fit together beautifully in this equation called Euler's identity. It was discovered by Euler, one of the greatest mathematicians in history, and he saw this as proof that math was designed by God. Also, Euler was a devout Calvinist.
And lastly, we roll it back around to his earlier video on maths and God. We showed last time that this wouldn't be correct for several reasons. In short, the fact that maths include infinites doesn't actualize or show evidence for God. E is Euler's number, an irrational number like pi is irrational. It is 2.71828 approximately, and it's used for logarithmic calculations and exponential function. I is defined as a square root of -1, which we can't actually do in normal maths. Pi is the ratio of the circumference of a circle to the radius, or about 3.1415926535. Sorry. Now, I'm not a mathematician, and as you can see, I'm on a time crunch, so all I will say is that maths allows us to describe things that happen in our universe. It helps us to understand how things in reality function, and if you want a more detailed explanation, check out the other videos on my channel. Time. Damn, I was hoping for better than that.
How does it feel to be such a total failure?
I wouldn't say that was a total failure. I did touch on all the points after all. I mean, we didn't get too detailed, and I could have gone over all of them a bit better, but we were rushing with this. So, at the end, he does honestly state that he isn't trying to make an argument for the 10 arguments in this and just talk about the arguments themselves. So, for what reason should I believe any of these arguments from him in the future?
Trust me, bro.
Okay, Angel, that was good. In the meantime, I am Corsi, and this is the Fluffy Atheist. Pet those like and subscribe buttons, and remember, if you faith around, I'll help you find out what the Bible actually says.